turn please to the book of Psalms, please, and Psalm number 56. The book of Psalms, number 56. You'll notice the inscription of the psalm to the chief musician upon Jonath Elim Rekokim Mitchtam of David, when the Philistines took him in Gath. Be merciful unto me, O God, for man would swallow me up. He fighteth daily, oppresseth me. Mine enemies would daily swallow me up, for they be many that fight against me, O thou Most High. What time I am afraid, I will trust in thee. In God will I praise his word. In God I have put my trust. I will not fear what flesh can do unto me. Every day they wrest me with my words. Their thoughts are against me for evil. They gather themselves together. They hide themselves. They mark my steps when they wait for my soul. Shall they escape by iniquity? In thine anger cast down the people, O God. Thou tellest my wanderings. Put thou my tears into thy bottle. Are they not in thy book? Thou tellest my wanderings. Put thou my tears into thy bottle. Are they not in thy book? You'll notice the background of the psalm. We're told it. Here's David in the days of his rejection. You can read about them in 1 Samuel and chapter 21 and others. He's fleeing for his life. He's taking refuge amongst the Philistines. He's there in Gath. You can imagine the feelings, the emotions. Anointed, but rejected. And in the midst of his sufferings, he raises this Mitchtam psalm, for that's what it's called in the inscription. This word, a Mitchtam psalm, has a somewhat obscure meaning. Some suggest it comes from a word to mean to hide, to cover. It's a psalm then that has a hidden meaning. Maybe like David in Gath, the circumstances of your life are such that before God you would search for the hidden meaning. Some suggest it comes from a word that means to a golden psalm, a golden jewel, as one has put it. And as you read the psalm, and as you understand that all the wanderings of life's journey are written in his book, as you come to appreciate there's not a tear that you've ever shed that isn't precious to him and put in his bottle, is it not a golden psalm? And as you search for that hidden meaning and come to appreciate something of the preciousness of those tears to him, some have suggested this is a word that comes with a background meaning to engrave. Are they not engraven here, written in his book? Says the psalmist, thou tellest my wanderings. Put thou my tears into thy bottle. Are they not in thy book? He takes note of the sorrows and the tears. I thought, of the tears of others that he observed when he was here. For he told them all and he put them in his bottle. When he was here, he saw something, didn't he, of what we might call tears of desolation. You remember right at the start of that earthly journey, Matthew tells us in chapter 2, he quotes from the weeping prophet Jeremiah, doesn't he, in chapter 31 of Jeremiah. And Matthew records, in the days of the slaughter of the innocents, in the days of Herod, in Ramah a voice was heard, lamentation and weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children. There's not a parent in this room this morning that doesn't know the truth of what I say. That there's nothing on earth that will wring sorrow and tears from your eyes like concern for children. You come to the end of that earthly pathway, and you hear the words of Luke in chapter 23 as they draw near to the cross, and that band of women follow, and he says, daughters of Jerusalem, weep not for me, but for yourselves and for your children. As he speaks even of eternal loss for those that reject him. Maybe there's parents in the room tonight, and maybe tears have been shed for children. Maybe some even unsaved. I want to tell you this morning, he knows all about it. Those tears are precious to him. Thou tellest my wanderings. Put thou my tears into thy bottle. Are they not in thy book? If he marked tears of desolation, there was a day in his life on earth when he took note too of tears of devotion. Tears of devotion. You remember Luke tells us in chapter 7 of that feast that was made, and there came a woman which was a sinner. Isn't that lovely how Luke, who tells of the perfect man, so carefully records a woman that was a sinner? You remember she came with her alabaster box of ointment most precious and stood at his feet behind, says Luke, as she was weeping. She began to wash his feet with her tears. There's no appreciation like the appreciation of the redeemed. Those that have come to appreciate something of the loveliness and the preciousness of Christ. It was said this morning, wasn't it, that there's never been a man like him. Remember the words of the Lord Jesus to a Simon as he looked at that woman weeping. Which of them would love him the most? But he to whom the most is forgiven. And he looks to a Simon. He says, I came into your home. You gave me no water for my feet. He says, you gave me no oil to anoint my head. He says, thou gavest me no kiss. I wonder this morning in this company, have there been tears of devotion in the past week? It would be something, wouldn't it, if when we came together on a Lord's Day morning, if redeemed hearts were so moved with appreciation for Christ, if tears were marked. I want to say, those tears of devotion, unknown to others around us, are treasured in heaven. He puts them in his bottle. They're in his book. There were here tears too, weren't there, when he was here? Not just of desolation, of devotion. You come to chapters like John chapter 11. They're tears of disappointment. I'm sure there are folks in this room tonight, and not so many decades will have passed on the Christian journey and the journey of life, when you've shed tears of disappointment. Remember the words of a Martha and Mary, both of them, one at the start of the account and one towards the end. Both of them independently come to him. And what do they say? They say, Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died. Can you not hear the reproach? We sent and called for you, Master. You waited 2 days where you were. If only you'd been here, my brother hadn't died. Whenever I read that, I think of the words of those disciples in the boat in Mark, is it chapter 4? As the storm raged, and it says of that little boat that it was almost now full. And they go and they wake him. And they say, Master, carest thou not that we perish? Maybe it's just me. But if you are like me, have there not been times in life's experience when you said almost the same? Carest thou not? Tears of disappointment. I thought too of Christ's tears. For if our tears are precious to him, you can be sure his tears are precious to God. Tears of sympathy, the sympathies of Christ. Stay in John 11 just for a moment. And those beautiful words in verse 32. When Jesus therefore saw her weeping, he groaned in the spirit and was troubled. He troubled himself. And verse 35. Jesus wept. To think this morning, whatever the cause of our tears, to think there is one in heaven, we've thought of him this morning as our great high priest. And the one who saw her weeping, himself would weep. Every tear that we shed, precious to him. Remember his words on occasion, as he spoke to them of the sparrows, and not one of them falls to the ground without your Father in heaven knowing. You have more value, he says, than many sparrows. He says, the hairs of your head are all numbered. Remember the words of the prophet Isaiah back in chapter 53? Surely he hath borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. The scripture tells us, doesn't it, to weep with them that weep. Rejoice with them that do rejoice. Something isn't there in the depth of life's experience when someone comes alongside and there's nothing they can say and nothing they can do, but they can weep with those that weep. Have you ever thought this morning that in heaven there's one who's wept with those that weep? And Jesus wept. You know, the Shulamite said of that beloved of her heart, as she goes down that description of his person, she comes to his belly. She says his belly is as bright ivory, overlaid with sapphire. You know, as she speaks of his belly, she's speaking of the inward part of him, the place of the emotions. She says that it's as bright ivory, overlaid with sapphire. You remember, won't you, that ivory is obtained by a process of suffering and death? And she sees that ivory overlaid with sapphire. You remember the sapphire stone, blue, the blue of heaven. Think this morning of the emotions of a risen man in heaven. He's passed through sufferings and death. He's now covered in the glory, the heavenly blue. But to think this morning in heaven, he still feels on behalf of his own the sympathies of Christ, the sorrows of Christ, tears of sorrow. Remember when he descended Olivet for the very last time? He wept over what might have been. It says that he wept over it and said, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how oft would I have gathered thee as a hen would gather her chicks, but you would not." And as he looked at their rejection of him, to think that he wept. I wonder this morning if before the gospel meeting we ever weep tears at the thought of the lost. Remember that rich young ruler who went away sad for he had great possessions. It says Jesus, beholding him, loved him. Think of the sufferings of Christ. Remember that last time he ascended Olivet. And he'd follow in the footsteps of his father David at another day of rejection in his life from the day of Absalom and the treachery of Ahithophel. You read the passage in 2 Samuel, it says that he passed over the Kidron and went up by the ascent of Olivet and wept as he went up. And you follow his steps over the Kidron into the garden on Olivet. And he wept over what was yet to be. Says the Hebrew writer speaks of his strong crying and tears. The tears of Christ. Says the psalmist, "Put thou my tears into thy bottle. Are they not in thy book?" The poet put it like this, "Garden of tears that never mortal could ever weep, not of the common river, drawn from a deeper deep, drawn from a depth unsounded, coursing towards the sod, telling of love unbounded, sourced in the heart of God." I must come to an end. I thought it was interesting that there are 2 references to tears that you would never expect. On the resurrection morning, that morning of triumph and hope. And yet you remember to a Mary the question was asked in John 20, "Why weepest thou?" And you remember something else, and I'm sorry to say this, but isn't it strange to think that there were ever tears in heaven? You remember the words to a John in Revelation 5, says John, "I wept sore." Why were they weeping? They were weeping because they thought he wasn't there. They were weeping because they thought he wasn't there. Remember the words of a Mary, "They have taken away my Lord, and I know not where they have laid him." You can think of the uncertainty of hopes dashed. She's weeping. What about John? Remember John at the throne. There's one who sits on the throne and he has the book, the title Deeds of Earth, prophet on his hand. But there was none found worthy to open the book, and John wept sore. You remember, of course, they might have thought he wasn't there, but he was. Remember, to Mary, he reveals himself by his word. In the midst of her tears, he says to her, "Mary." She says, "Rabboni," Master. Maybe there's someone here, and it almost feels like he isn't there. Just today to hear his word. You remember to a John, he revealed himself at the throne, not with his word, but by his works. What do you mean? Remember it says concerning John, that John turned and he saw, in the midst of the throne and the beasts and the living creatures, he saw a young lamb freshly slain. Saw the marks of Calvary upon him, and he revealed himself. It was the same with those 2 on the Emmaus road, wasn't it? With their hearts downcast as they walked along, and he joined them. They were sad and sorrowing and so on. And right at the end of the passage, their gloom is dispelled as he made himself known to them in the breaking of bread in the home with the meal. What made the difference? He was there. But you see, the point I want to lay upon you this morning as we close, although they didn't realize it, he was there all the time. Maybe there's someone here and the pathway seems lonely and difficult and sad. Maybe it feels as if you're all on your own, like a Mary, like a John, like those Emmaus too. But he's there all the time. Thank God there's coming an eternal day when he will wipe away all tears from their eyes. Think of the tenderness with which he'll do it. The one who's wept himself, he'll wipe away all tears. How? Why will it be so? Because he is there. God will dwell with them and be their God, and they shall be his people. He says, John, his servant shall serve him, and they shall see his face. But in this meantime, remember, we can say like David, thou tellest my wandering, put thou my tears into thy bottle. Are they not in